What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we will be breaking down the best stacks that I'm currently seeing in 2024 fantasy football drafts. So, for the purpose of today's video, we'll mainly be looking at the quarterback and wide receiver position, the best overall stacks that I'm seeing at both of those positions that correlate in terms of overall ADP, and the stacks that I'm specifically targeting for that reason. So, if you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long: free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way in. If you guys have any fantasy football questions, drop them down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video. All right, first overall, I want to talk about CJ Stroud and the Texans wide receivers. When we were first going into the offseason, I really thought this was going to be like at this point in the offseason, we're about to be in the month of August, and when things really kicked off in terms of early drafting this offseason, I thought this stack was going to be like near impossible to really target. And don't get me wrong, like you still need a second round pick to select Nico Collins. Sometimes he goes early in the second round, sometimes he falls to the end of the second round. And you still need a relatively early pick to select CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud's current ADP on the Sleeper app is 43.3. Then we look at his ADP on Underdog Fantasy, it's at 70 overall. So I do think that actually leaves CJ Stroud in an area where you don't have to pay too steep of a draft price. And currently in the subscriber mock drafts that I've been doing with the community, I've seen CJ Stroud fall back a little bit in drafts. And then an Underdog, every now and then, he even falls back in those drafts. And when we look at these wide receivers for the Texans, okay, let's just look at Underdog ADP first. Nico Collins is at 17.5, so you're still going to need a second round pick for Nico Collins, but Stephon Diggs is at 32.8, and Tank Dell is at 35.5. So these are guys that are going, end of the third round. Every now and then, Tank Dell falls out to the beginning of the fourth round. And then when we look on the sleeper app, we have Nico Collins going at an ADP of 28.9. And then we've got the next two guys, Tank Dell at 53.7, and then Stephon Diggs at 29.5. So the reason why I like targeting a Texans wide receiver stack with CJ Stroud is because, like I said, CJ Stroud falling back a little bit in drafts right now. You don't have to pay a super like elite price like you see with like Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen, guys like that. But you can still get someone who has a chance to finish as an elite fantasy quarterback, maybe without the rushing upside, right? And then you have three guys you can select here, okay? So even if you don't have, or you don't want to spend that early second round pick on Nico Collins, you've still got two other options in Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs that I think will be viable fantasy options. And when you have CJ Stroud and one of these Texans wide receivers in your starting lineup, you will be in a good spot. So I know this is kind of cheating because I'm just saying pick any Texans wide receiver, but I just think this gives you so many ways to pivot and still end up with one of these Texans wide receivers and CJ Stroud. And I don't really feel like I need to talk about why this is a good stack in general, in terms of the potential fantasy outlook that these guys are going to give you. I think that the Texans offense is going to be great this year. They're going to score a lot of points. They're going to be very good for fantasy football. It might be a little hard to determine week to week, like which guy is going to be here because all these wide receivers are so good. But at the end of the day, they're going to score a lot of points. It's going to be good for fantasy football. And they have a good enough ADP that you can kind of pivot and draft one guy versus the other if you feel like you need to do so. You don't have to spend a crazy high pick on CJ Stroud. So I've got them at number one. Let's move along. All right, moving right along, we're going with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver. So I'm cheating once again here, but just hear me out, okay? Patrick Mahomes, a player on Underdog at an ADP of 45.5. Then we go over to the Sleeper app. His ADP is 35.8. But, sometimes he falls back just slightly. His ADP is ahead of Lamar Jackson's, but sometimes you see Lamar Jackson selected before him. And every now and then he just falls back just a couple spots, but nothing too crazy, especially with the current hype that's kind of building with that Kansas City Chiefs offense going into this season, which does not surprise me by any means. But then when we look at these wide receivers, okay, it's similar to what we just talked about. You've got plenty of guys you can target that you can pivot from and still end up with a good, viable stack for the season, especially if you're drafting in a in a best ball format. Currently on Underdog, Hollywood Brown's ADP is 53.6, so better starting ADP than Nico Collins for sure. Then Rashid Rice at 59.9. Xavier Worthy has moved up to 63.9. On the Sleeper app, though, currently, and I think this is going to change moving into the month of August based on what I've seen in subscriber mock drafts, but currently we've got Rashid Rice all the way at 71.9, Xavier Worthy at 76, and Hollywood Brown at 80 overall for their ADPs. So those are guys that are going much later, according to what Sleeper's seen in their mock drafts. Just depends on who you're drafting with. I am seeing fantasy managers right now not afraid to draft these Chiefs wide receivers earlier than their current ADP. That includes myself. But overall, these are still cheaper draft prices than the 3 wide receivers we just talked about, right? And this Kansas City Chiefs offense is going to be great this year as long as everyone stays healthy. Patrick Mahomes might be in line for his best season ever at the quarterback position, which would be insane. But really, when you look at this offense, I don't think that's insane to say. And once again, you're just in a position, if you get Mahomes a little bit earlier on, you still have plenty of ways to pivot and get at least one of these Chiefs wide receivers and get a good viable stack for the redraft season or for a best ball tournament. So I've got them at number 2. I can tell you guys right now, I've been taking a lot of this Kansas City Chiefs offensive stack. I think it's really going to pay off this season. All right, this is the last time I'm cheating, but I'm going to talk about Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers wide receivers up next. Okay, Jordan Love currently has a very good ADP, I think, on both Underdog and Sleeper, but on Underdog, he's currently sitting at 97.4. And then on the Sleeper app, he's sitting at 86.3. Don't forget, this was the QB 5 last year in fantasy. And once again, you're just in a position where you can kind of pivot to all these different wide receivers, okay? Jaden Reed currently is the wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, who's first off the board in most drafts and in most mock drafts. His ADP on Underdog is 57.7. When we look ahead, Christian Watson has ADP of 68.9 on Underdog. Romeo Doubs, who I think is a steal, is at 107.1. Then you have to look pretty far to also consider then Tavion Wicks, who I know some people are higher on, just consider a sleeper, but I think he's a great pick at his ADP of 115.9. That's all on Underdog. When we go over to the Sleeper app, though, you're seeing these guys being drafted even later. So Jaden Reed currently has an ADP of 73.7, but then when we start to look at the other guys, right, Christian Watson's at 101.6 on the Sleeper app. And when we look at the next two, Romeo Doubs is going at 117.7. But I mean, I've seen Tavion Wicks fall to like the final round of mock drafts right now. He's at 167.7. So don't get me wrong, I still think Reed, Watson, Doubs are better in terms of targeting for stacks, but Wicks at least leaves you with that final option with some potential upside. I'm personally taking the most of Jordan Love and Christian Watson because I think it brings the most upside to the table. But I love Jaden Reed, and I think Romeo Doubs is a very good value. Still had very good chemistry with Jordan Love last year, and 8 receiving touchdowns. Was a good red zone threat too for the Green Bay Packers. This is another offense that's set to score a lot of points this year. Give us a lot of fantasy points. You can pivot all around at the wide receiver position. Jordan Love and these Green Bay Packers wide receivers, absolutely a good stack to target moving into 2024. All right, let's try to talk about some single quarterback, single wide receiver stacks as we finish out the video here. So we've got Tua and Jaylen Waddle coming up next. And the reason I did this is because, you have to have the 1.2, 1.3 to land Tyreek Hill. Every now I've done so many mock drafts, regular drafts this year. It's like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. You have to have one of those picks to get Tyreek Hill. I've maybe seen him fall to 1.4 like a handful of times, right? So if you're able to, then yes, stack Tua with Tyreek Hill. I don't think we really need to talk about that being a great stack, but let's just look at Jaylen Waddle's ADP right now on Underdog. It's at 20 overall. So you still have to have a second round pick, similar to Nico Collins, but I love Jaylen Waddle going into this season. And just for reference, his sleeper ADP is a little bit further back at 35.7. And I do see him fall back more in PPR mock drafts than Underdog drafts, but he's in line for a ton of work, was hurt last year, still had over 1,000 receiving yards. This offense, one of the best offenses in the league last year. They're going to be great again this year as long as everyone's healthy. he's in line to have a great fantasy season. And I think a lot of people agree with that, right? So taking Jaylen Waddle in the second round, I don't think there's any like controversy around that, whether he's your wide receiver 1 or 2. If he comes off the board as wide receiver 2, you get him in the third round. That's even better. Whatever it is, you get Jaylen Waddle, then just look at Tua's ADP, right? He's really falling back in drafts right now. His ADP is 124.6, which I think he's one of the best steals at the quarterback position currently in mock drafts and underdog drafts. His ADP on sleeper is 107.3, and this was a top 10 fantasy quarterback last year who led the league in passing yards. So, the ADP is there for Tua. If you land Hill early, great. If you land Waddle, still pretty early in the second round, beginning of the third, whatever it's going to be, then that's great. Just look at where you can draft Tua. It's too much of a good stack to not target. So I try to stay away from guys like, Jamar Chase, right? Like you have to have this specific draft pick to probably land him. And like Joe Burrow's still a really good value later in drafts. CeeDee Lamb's another example, but once again, like you have to have like the 1.2, 1.3, similar to Tyreek Hill to get CeeDee Lamb and then draft Dak, who I think Dak Prescott is also at a good value. Similar with Marvin Harrison Jr., like if you don't have somewhere between the 1.10 and the 1.12, you're probably not going to land Marvin Harrison Jr. And then, like, what's the point of talking about stacking him with Kyler Murray? Because it's just so hard to actually come out of your drafts with these really specific stacks. So this one's kind of close. Like I said, the end of a Tyreek Hill, target Tua. If not, then it's okay, I think, to wait, get Jaylen Waddle, and still target Tua late. He's at an incredible ADP right now. Let's move along. Okay, next up on the list, we've got Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. Once again, like I don't want to talk about Puka Nacua. If you're in position to stack Puka with Matthew Stafford, great. But we're really trying to look at better value ADP. Like I don't talk about AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts because once again, you're just at a very specific ADP where you're going to have to draft AJ Brown or Devonta Smith for that matter early, and then turn back around and draft Jalen Hurts early as well. What we want to look at here is who are the better later round quarterbacks that you can get, mid round quarterbacks that you can get, and still stack with someone who brings a lot of upside to the table. And I think Cooper Kupp still brings a lot of upside, a lot of consistency to the table at the wide receiver position. So yes, I like Puka Nacua. If you can draft Stafford with him late, that is fantastic. But currently, Cooper Kupp is going at a better value at the end of the day at an ADP of 27.6 on Underdog. Then when we move over to the Sleeper app, he is currently at an ADP of 41.6. So I get it. Puka is the new shiny toy, and I have nothing but good things to say about Puka Nacua. Kupp was up and down last year, was hurt the year before, but really when things got rolling last year and Kupp was back and healthy, double-digit fantasy points every single game between week 13 and week 17, a ceiling of 25.5 fantasy points. So Cooper Kupp, a much cheaper option than Puka Nacua. Then we look at Matthew Stafford, right? He is just going late in drafts. His ADP on Underdog 148.3. You go over to the Sleeper app. I mean, every now and then I see him not get drafted, but his ADP is 139.2. If Stafford stays healthy, these receivers stay healthy, the running backs stay healthy, this Sean McVay offense can still allow Matthew Stafford to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league easily, and a top 10 fantasy quarterback easily, and this can still be one of the best offenses in the whole league. I wholeheartedly believe that. There's no reason to not believe that at the end of the day. So Matthew Stafford just going really late in drafts. Cooper Kupp a little bit of a better value overall than Puka Nacua. Cooper Kupp is not done. Still going to bring a lot of consistency to the table. Overall, I think this is a great stack to target moving in to 2024. All right, I'm going to give you guys two bonus picks here because I kind of cheated on the first couple. But let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's talk about Trevor Lawrence, currently going at an NEP of 119.2 on Underdog. And another guy you can go in the final round of drafts and sleeper mock drafts right now at 107.3. Then let's talk about one of my favorite wide receivers in fantasy football, and that is Christian Kirk, who's just a model of consistency in full PPR, has an ADP of 45.9 on Underdog. Then when we move over to the Sleeper app, it's an ADP of 63.1. Don't forget, last year, Calvin Ridley was in this offense, and when Christian Kirk was healthy, he only gave you single digit fantasy performances 3 times. Okay. Ceiling of 21.96 fantasy points. This year, Brian Thomas Jr. is there. I'm not worried about it. Ridley was there last year. It didn't matter. Ingram was still there. ETN was still there. I don't think there's anything to worry about for Christian Kirk. He's going to be fully healthy this year. This is one of my favorite stacks to target, especially in best ball tournaments. I think T-Law, another guy that people just like don't understand. Trevor Lawrence had like 3 or 4 injuries last year. He played in a ton of games that he really shouldn't have played in. Yes, it felt like the Jags fell off and there was some poor quarterback play performances there at the end, but also what people are just not taking into account is that Trevor Lawrence played through a ton of injuries because when you're a quarterback, sometimes that's just what you do. You don't have a choice, right? This is a good stack to target. The ADPs are there for both the quarterback and the wide receiver. I would take a lot of shares of both of these guys right now if you want to target specific stack, whether it's for your redraft build or for a best ball tournament. I absolutely love this one. Let's move along. All right, last but not least, let's talk about some Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's talk about my guy, Baker Moneymaker Mayfield, and Mike Evans. Mike Evans currently at an ADP on Underdog of 24.2. Then over on the Sleeper app, an ADP of 29.4. So you still need an end of the second round, beginning of the third round selection to get Mike Evans. I get that. Can always pivot to Chris Godwin as well here, but I think that touchdown upside with Evans is going to repeat this year. Baker Mayfield. Okay, this is a player who was still a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football last year, and his ADP is 167.8 on Underdog, and then on Sleeper 167.4. Like I see him not get drafted all the time in Sleeper drafts. And I think he's going to be a guy who ends up on the waiver wire, someone that we pay attention to early in the season. So maybe not a crazy high ceiling with Baker Mayfield, but at the end of the day, like I said, top 10 quarterback in fantasy last year. I know Dave Canales not there, but at his ADP, I don't care. I think he's going to be just fine, right? And I think that chemistry, that connection we saw between Mayfield and Evans is going to roll right into this season. This offense is really not any different on paper than it was last year compared to this coming season. Mayfield, a beautiful ADP. Mike Evans, a guy that people are already drafting at his given ADP. So if you draft Mike Evans, you want a stack, you want to build a stack in a best ball tournament, go ahead and get Baker Mayfield. No reason to not take a chance on Baker, build this stack, and probably have some success moving into 2024 fantasy football. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, this is all we do here all year long, free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you're into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button, join the community on the way out. If you guys have any fantasy football questions, redraft, dynasty, or best ball, drop them down below. I'll get back to you whenever I can. And on top of that, be sure to join our free Discord so you guys know when I am hopping into Underdog drafts, when we are running our sleeper PPR mock drafts with the community, so you guys can get in on that and start practicing for the season if you are not already doing so. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on the catch.